The throne room of the Varelian Empire was a place built to intimidate. Massive pillars of black stone stretched upward into a vaulted ceiling, etched with glowing silver veins that pulsed faintly with power. The floor was polished to a mirror, sheen reflecting the long crimson carpet that led to the dais where King Dravkane sat on a throne carved from the bones of a great void-beast. The air was heavy with incense, but beneath it lingered the metallic tang of fear. Every courtier, minister, and military officer present that day stood in tense silence, for the king had called an unscheduled assembly, a rare and dangerous thing. At the foot of the throne stood Princess Yelena. Her frame was delicate, her long silver hair falling like moonlight over her shoulders. Compared to the towering, broad-shouldered warriors that made up most of the Varelian race, she looked almost childlike. Her skin was pale, her limbs slender, and though her eyes were large and luminous, they held the haunted look of someone who had spent her life hearing the same verdict whispered behind her back. Weak. The Varelians were a proud warrior species, bred for physical dominance. Strength and endurance were not merely valued, they were sacred, and Yelena possessed neither. Her body failed her during the intense training of her youth, and every attempt to prove herself ended in exhaustion or injury. Her father, the king, had tolerated her existence only out of duty to the bloodline, but now, it seemed, his patience had reached its end. "My daughter," King Dravkane began, his voice deep enough to make the chamber vibrate, "is to be given away." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gathered crowd. The courtiers shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. In Varelian culture, given away was not marriage, it was dismissal. A polite way to say cast out. "She will go to the human." The king continued, gesturing toward the tall figure standing to the side of the dais. All eyes turned toward him. Captain Elias Ward. He was unlike anyone else in the room. Broad-shouldered and confident, dressed not in ceremonial robes but in worn spacer leathers, he had the calm, watchful presence of a man who had survived too many fights to bother counting. He did not bow in the Varelian style, nor did he flinch. Under the weight of the king's gaze, Elias had come to Virel months earlier when a border war threatened to spiral out of control. His small crew of humans had fought alongside Varelian forces in a critical battle, tipping the scale just enough to prevent catastrophe. The king, impressed by the strange ferocity and adaptability of humans, had offered him payment in gold. Weapons or ships. Elias had surprised everyone by asking for none of those. Instead, he had made an unusual request, though the details were not known until this moment. The king's words echoed in the chamber. "The human will take her. She will live aboard his vessel and be his responsibility." The murmurs turned into open whispers now. Why would a human want her? What use is a weakling to a mercenary? Has he lost his mind? Yelena kept her head lowered, not daring to meet the eyes of those watching her. Humiliation burned in her chest. She knew what they thought, that she was being given away like a useless trinket, an unwanted burden to be dumped on an outsider. Elias stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'll take good care of her." The king's eyes narrowed. "She is not a soldier. She is not even a proper Varelian. I give her to you as she is, broken. Do not bring her back." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe she's not broken. Maybe she's just been handled wrong." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd at the insolence. The king's expression hardened, but he did not challenge the human further. Instead, he waved a dismissive hand. "Then take her, and may she be your problem from now on." The court session ended abruptly, leaving Yelena standing there as servants approached to escort her to the docking bay. She dared one last glance at her father, but he was already speaking to his generals. As though she were nothing more than a concluded transaction, Elias walked beside her in silence until they reached the corridor. Only then did he speak, his tone quieter but firm. I didn't take you because I wanted property. I took you because I think you've got more in you than they've ever let you show. Yelena had grown up surrounded by marble corridors, servants who moved like shadows, and meals prepared with delicate artistry. On the human ship, there were no grand halls or jeweled decorations, only narrow steel corridors, bulkheads that hummed with the vibration of the engines and the faint scent of oil, metal, and recycled air. When she first stepped aboard, Elias didn't show her to a lavish guest suite. Instead, he led her to a small cabin barely larger than a storage room. A simple bed bolted to the wall, a locker for belongings, and a small desk. No silks, no cushions, no servants. "This is yours," he said plainly. Yelena hesitated. "This is where the crew sleeps." "This is where you sleep," Elias replied, almost amused. "Your crew now, not royalty." It was the first lesson she learned aboard the Resolute titles meant nothing here. The first day the next morning, before the ship's lights had fully brightened, Elias banged on her door. "Up, cargo bay, now." Still groggy, Yelena followed. Him, wearing the only outfit she'd been given, simple work pants and a loose shirt. The cargo bay was a cavernous space filled with crates, supply racks, and a section cleared for what looked suspiciously like a training area. Elias tossed her a weighted staff. It nearly pulled her to the ground. "What is this for?" she asked, straining to lift it properly. "Training," he said. "Strength, balance, coordination. You're going to learn all three." Yelena's first attempts were humiliating. The staff felt like it weighed as much as she did. When Elias demonstrated basic stances and swings, she stumbled, her strikes clumsy and slow. Sweat poured down her face, and after only minutes, her arms shook so badly she could barely hold the weapon. Again, Elias said each time she faltered. By midday, she was trembling with exhaustion. In the palace, such strain would have been considered improper for a princess. Here, Elias didn't even acknowledge it, he simply made her repeat the drill until she got it right. When she collapsed onto the floor at the end of the session, he handed her a bottle of water and crouched down to meet her eyes. "Weakness is a habit," he told her, his voice calm but unyielding, "and habits can be broken." Weeks of pain, the days that followed, blurred into a relentless routine. Morning. Strength training with resistance bands, weightlifting, and balance drills. Afternoon. Weapon practice, staff, blaster, knife, unarmed strikes. Evening. Running laps through the ship's corridors or doing push-ups until her arms gave out. Every part of her ached. She discovered muscles she hadn't known existed, and each one seemed to protest this new life. But slowly, so slowly she barely noticed, her body began to change. Her grip grew stronger. Her endurance improved. Her reflexes sharpened. Still, Elias pushed her harder. "You're better than yesterday," he'd say, "but not better than you could be." It wasn't just physical training. He made her study galactic navigation, ship maintenance basics, battlefield tactics, even human history. At first, she resented it. Then she realized something. Elias was building her into more than a fighter. He was building her into someone who could stand on her own. The first breakthrough, the turning point, came one afternoon when Elias called for a sparring session. She had been dreading it. He moved faster than she could track, and his blows, though pulled, still left her sore. They circled each other on the cargo bay floor. Elias feinted left, and Yelena instinctively blocked, but instead of retreating, she countered, slamming the staff into his side hard enough to make him step back. For a moment, both froze. Then a slow grin spread across Elias's face. "There you are," he said, "the fighter hiding inside." Yelena felt a spark of something unfamiliar, pride. It wasn't the empty praise courtiers used to flatter her. This was real. She had earned it. A different kind of respect over time. Yelena noticed how the rest of the Resolute's crew treated her. At first, they'd been wary another noble passenger to babysit. But when they saw her sweating, straining, and refusing to quit, their attitudes shifted. They began offering tips, sharing stories, even challenging her to friendly matches. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was part of something. Not an ornament, not a burden, but a crewmate. One night, as they sat in the mess hall, after a grueling day, Yelena asked Elias quietly, "Why are you doing this? You could have left me as I was." He didn't look up from his meal. "Because someone needs to show you you're not broken. And once you believe that, you won't. Need me to tell you again?" The girl who had once struggled to lift a training staff could now run the length of the ship without gasping for breath. Her arms were corded with lean muscle, her movements precise and balanced. The staff no longer dragged her down, it flowed. With her, like an extension of her own body. Elias said little about her progress, but the way he nodded after a sparring match or gave her a rare grin was worth more than any royal praise she had once received. Still, Yelena had never faced real combat. Not against an enemy who truly meant to kill her. That would change in a single night. The ambush, the Resolute, was ferrying a shipment of medical supplies through a quiet stretch of the outer rim. When the attack came, it started as a faint ping. On the sensors too small to be a patrol, too slow to be a military ship. But Elias had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself with a roar. "Pirate raiding party," he muttered, scanning the incoming readings. "Fast skiffs. Armed. They'll be on us in minutes." The crew scrambled to battle stations. Yelena followed Elias to the armory, adrenaline burning through her veins. "You stay in the rear," he told her, handing her a blaster. "Cover fire only. No heroics." She wanted to argue, but the steel in his tone silenced her. The first. Impacts rattled the ship magnetic clamps locking onto the hull as boarding tubes extended. Metal shrieked as cutting torches burned through. Then the pirates poured in. The fight, they were ragged, desperate-looking beings, patchwork armor, weapons. Scavenged from a dozen worlds. Their leader, a broad-shouldered Krell, bellowed orders as they spread through the corridors. Elias led the defense, blaster fire echoing off the walls. Yelena stayed behind cover, firing in controlled bursts, just as he had taught her. Each shot was precise, not wasted. But then she saw Elias take a hit glancing, but enough to stagger him. 3 pirates broke past the defensive line, rushing straight for him. Something inside her snapped. She surged from cover, staff in hand, before she even realized she'd dropped the blaster. The first pirate swung a jagged blade. She stepped. Inside his guard, staff cracking into his jaw with a sickening thud. The second lunged at her. She pivoted, driving the staff's end into his ribs, feeling the air leave his lungs. The third was fast, too fast. He clipped her shoulder with a blade, the sting sharp and hot. But pain no longer froze her, it fueled her. She swept his legs and brought the staff down hard, disarming him before he could recover. It was over in seconds. 3 bodies on the deck. Yelena standing over them, chest heaving, staff steady in her hands. Elias's eyes, Elias, still crouched behind a bulkhead, looked up at her. There was no lecture, no reprimand for disobeying his orders. Instead, his lips curled into that slow, knowing grin she had seen only a few times before. "Told you," he said. The fighter was in there all along. They pushed forward together, clearing the rest of the pirates in brutal efficiency. By the time the last boarding skiff detached, the Resolute was still in one piece, and so were they. The aftermath, when the battle was over, the crew gathered in the mess hall, bruised but alive. Someone slapped Yelena on the shoulder and called her steel-blooded. Another offered her a mug of something bitter and strong. She felt the unfamiliar weight of pride, not the hollow, ceremonial kind, but the solid, earned pride that came from proving herself in the fire. Later, when the others had drifted away, Elias sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee. "You broke formation," he said simply. "I know," she admitted. "I thought you'd be angry." "I should be," he replied, "but you made the right call. You saw the opening, and you took it. That's what fighters do." She leaned back, letting the words sink in. Fighters, not princesses. Not burdens. Fighters. The Resolute dropped out of warp above Verelian Prime, its hull gleaming under the pale blue light of the system's twin moons. The capital city sprawled below, a vast network of towers and spires, each one adorned with banners bearing the royal crest. Yelena stood at the viewport, her reflection overlapping the world she had once called home. But the woman in the glass was not the frail, uncertain girl who had left. Her posture was straight, her eyes sharp, her jaw set with quiet confidence. The simple combat armor she wore was functional, not ceremonial, scratched and scuffed in places, a testament to the months she'd spent earning every mark. "Ready?" Elias asked, standing beside her. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. The landing the palace docking bay was as pristine as she remembered polished floors, gilded railings, guards in ceremonial armor standing at attention. Yet the air felt different to her now, lighter, less oppressive. When the ramp lowered, Yelena walked down at her own pace, each step measured and steady. She noticed the way the guards glanced at her, first with recognition, then with something closer to surprise. Elias followed behind her, hands clasped casually behind his back. Utterly unbothered by the stares, they were met by Lord Vaskin, the king's chief minister, a tall Verelian with eyes like sharpened glass. He looked Yelena up and down, clearly searching for the frailty he remembered. "The king awaits you in the grand hall," he said, his tone clipped. "Both of you." The Hall of Judgment, the grand hall, had not changed. Massive blackstone pillars, silver-veined walls, and the same crimson carpet leading to the throne. The courtiers lined the sides as before, their eyes hungry for gossip. At the far end, King Dravkan sat as he always had, towering and immovable, his gaze cold and measuring. When Yelena entered, a ripple of murmurs spread through the room. This was not the daughter they remembered. Gone were the delicate silks and timid steps. Instead, she moved like a soldier, head high, stride purposeful. The faint scars on her forearms caught the light and the weight of the armor across her. Shoulders seemed to belong there. The king's gaze narrowed. "I see the human has changed you." Yelena met his eyes without flinching. "No, father. The human showed me what I always could be." The room went still. No one, least of all Yelena, had ever spoken to the king in such a direct, unshaken tone. The courtiers' reactions from the corner of her vision, Yelena caught the shifting expressions of the courtiers. Those who had once whispered about her weakness now looked uncertain, even wary. Lord Vaskin's eyes narrowed slightly, as though calculating the implications of this transformation. Elias stood to the side, silent, but she could feel the quiet satisfaction radiating from him. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone told the court that her strength was no accident. The Test King Dravkan leaned forward on his throne. "Strength is proven in action, not words. You claim to be changed, let us see it." At his signal, a warrior from the royal guard stepped forward, clad in practice armor and holding a heavy staff. The unspoken challenge was clear: defeat him, and the court would acknowledge her. Fail, and she would confirm their doubts. Yelena didn't hesitate. She stepped into the center of the hall, staff in hand, the familiar weight grounding her. Guard attacked first, swinging hard. She sidestepped, deflecting the blow with ease. He came at her again, faster, but her reflexes were sharper now. Months of sparring with Elias had honed her timing to a blade's edge. She caught him with a swift strike to the ribs, then pivoted to sweep his legs. He hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the chamber. Yelena stood over him, staff pointed down, not in mockery, but in control. The hall erupted in murmurs. Even the king's expression shifted just slightly, but enough to see the flicker of surprise. A changed balance when she returned to stand before the throne. Yelena spoke again. "I am no longer the burden you cast aside. I am a fighter. And, if you doubt it, Father, send me where your warriors have failed and I will show you." Her words hung in the air like a drawn blade. King Dravkan said nothing for several moments, his gaze locked on hers. Finally, he leaned back, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. The Korthan swarm, a brutal species that fought not for territory but for eradication, had struck deep into Varelian space. 2 frontier worlds had already fallen, their cities turned to ash, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. The Varelian high command was in chaos. Veteran generals hesitated, bickering over defensive lines. The king called his war council, but the truth was clear. The empire was losing. That was when Yelena stepped forward. The assignment, her father's gaze lingered on her longer than it once would have. The fleet holding the Regos corridor is leaderless. Their commander fell in the first wave. If we lose that corridor, the swarm will have a direct path to the core worlds. He hesitated only briefly before saying, "Take command. Prove your words." The order was a gamble. The corridor was a death trap. Command there meant either glory or annihilation. Yelena accepted without hesitation. Preparing for war within hours, she was aboard the Varelian battlecruiser Iron Fang, its crew tense and demoralized. Many recognized her, some as the weak princess of rumor, others as the warrior who had humiliated a royal guard in the Grand Hall. She wasted no time on speeches. Instead, she walked the decks, speaking directly to gunners, engineers, pilots. She asked about their needs, listened to their frustrations, and promised them only one thing, that she would stand in the thick of it with them. When Elias arrived, summoned at her request, he found her studying star maps in the command room. "Looks bad," he said. "It's worse than it looks," she replied. "But we can make them bleed if we're clever." They spent the next hours crafting a strategy, not to meet the enemy head-on, but to turn the terrain of the corridor into a killing ground. The narrow asteroid fields and dense debris clouds could be a disadvantage to the unwary, or the perfect trap. The battle when the Korthan swarm arrived, it was with overwhelming force, wave after wave of bioships, their hulls alive with writhing chitin. The Iron Fang and its support fleet held formation, letting the enemy push deeper into the corridor. Then Yelena gave the order. Hidden minefields detonated, collapsing parts of the asteroid belt and forcing the swarm into narrow channels. Varelian frigates darted from cover, striking vulnerable flanks before vanishing again. The enemy's numbers worked against them. Cramped quarters turned their vast fleet into a tangled mess. From the bridge, Yelena moved with absolute focus, issuing orders with calm precision. She was everywhere, coordinating fighter wings, redirecting damaged ships, even manning a forward gun when the crew was short-handed. The crew, watching their commander fight alongside them, found their own morale surging, turning the tide midway. Through the battle, the swarm's flagship, a massive, spined monstrosity, pushed through the chaos, intent on breaking the line. Yelena saw the danger instantly. "Bring us forward," she ordered. The helmsman hesitated. "Ma'am, that puts us directly in their firing arc." "Do it," she said, her voice like steel. The Iron Fang surged ahead, drawing the flagships. Attention! At the last moment, Yelena ordered a sudden roll, revealing the ship's concealed railgun array. The weapon fired once, a tungsten slug tearing through the Corthan flagship's core. The explosion lit the corridor like a second sun. With their command vessel destroyed, the swarm's coordination broke. Varelian forces counterattacked, driving them back in a rout. Aftermath hours later, the battle was over. The Regos corridor still belonged to the Varelian Empire. Casualties had been heavy, but victory was undeniable. When Yelena returned to the capital, she was not met with whispers this time. The city erupted in cheers as her ship descended. Soldiers saluted her, civilians called her name, and the court that once dismissed her now looked on with thinly veiled awe in the throne room. King Dravkan regarded her for a long moment before speaking. "You have done what even my finest generals could not." "It wasn't just me," Yelena said. "It was the crew, and the human who taught me to stand when others would kneel." Elias, standing nearby, gave her a small, proud smile. The king's gaze shifted to him. "You made her strong." Elias shook his head. "No, your majesty, she was strong. She just needed someone to believe it before she did." The Galaxy Watch's word of the victory spread beyond the Empire. Other powers took note not just of the Varelian princess turned warrior, but of the human influence behind her transformation. The idea that a human could take what others saw as weakness and forge it into strength unsettled more than a few. Alien leaders thought because if humans could do that for others, what could they do for themselves? And so the legend began not of a fragile royal or a mercenary captain, but of a warrior forged in the unlikeliest of alliances. The galaxy would never see her as weak again.